And thank you so much, Javier, for coming from Spain to be here with us today. And also, Mario has the floor as well to share this some announcements. And please keep here as well for the social event. Okay, so and just to repeat this invitation, when the at the end of the schedule we have an instance, so we can go where we had lunch because we will have a cocktail, a welcoming cocktail from the organizing committee, and we want to meet together. There is a very nice organization, specifically dedicated for all of us that are part of the summit and the Alpescas meeting. And also for tomorrow, we are also going to have a dinner. I believe it's not going to be here, but rather the wine tasting place, as I was told. We are going to be confirming this information. And you are also kindly invited to enjoy with us, both on the technical side of this event and also the social aspect, where both help us feel that this fishing family in Latin America and globally is increasingly better. So please write it down and see you later. And okay, good afternoon. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to this magnificent event. What a beautiful coincidence for today, this 12th of October, the national holiday in Spain, and be able to be here celebrating this day. And talking about the passion, such an exciting world like that of fishing, myth and realities of fishing. I don't know if about you, but personally, I'm pretty tired of seeing watching the media, for example, and hearing in so many conferences around the world how bad we are, those of us who work on the fishing sector. And with some of these beauties, for example, trolling fish is actually destroying everything. I presume you have all watched this Seaspiracy documentary with so many lies being told in there that we have it to develop wine marine energy as it's renewable, that we have to stop overfishing, that we face a serious climate issues, and we are called a part of the guilty parties and everything regarding feed. Don't eat the fish and the seafood because it has mercury, cadmium. Regarding the vegan sector, don't even eat the fish and the seafood because we are destroying the planet. Now, I will attempt to share the reality behind some of these myths, and I hope at least I can allow a few of us to reflect on that and maybe even change your opinion. But before, and even though Ciel was saying you are going to be sharing this happiness thing again, I have to start with that because someone in here has never heard me before. And it's something new for that because I repeat it every time as well. And because we are addressing an essential and strategic sector that more than ever during the pandemic has been proven in the world because of the activity of our fishermen. And when I say fishermen, I address aquaculture and fishing. We have been able to continue when we're all locked down by eating fish and seafood. And is the healthiest animal protein in the world and has the lowest carbon footprint when it comes to its production in a sector which is so exciting and it's a very Spanish word, especially from where I come, a really amazing sector. And amazing, if we move on to the real Spanish Academy of Language, means great, magnificent, excellent, cojonudo in Spanish. So please take that into consideration. Take that meaning, okay? Not another meanings you may be thinking of. So fishermen now are at the center of all of this, and I believe in the world in general. And then This is what they do, a job which is unfortunately unknown for most of society in the world. And people don't realize. And today we were eating this salmon, or every time we are eating at a restaurant, wherever, everything behind. So this fish can get to you, and people are like, "Well, yeah, fish is really expensive. Let's go buy cheap chicken." But if you realize all the effort, all the sacrifice behind, ever since growers are capturing, and when it goes through all the parts of the commercial chain, then we'd be like, "Well, it's cheap," but we have to share this truth. If we don't, people will continue not knowing about this. And I'm saying that we can be really proud of a fisherman, as back then Jesus Christ was of his apostles. Yes, maybe it's not a coincidence that there were his best friends, the disciples of Jesus. And for those of us who are Catholics, it means something, and for those that are not, it should mean something as well because they were his friends, and that's how it is. And then, as I said before, fishing is not the problem, it's part of the solution. And that's where we get into this animal protein as well. Some have called it the perfect protein, the healthiest part as well, with the greatest carbon footprint impact, which allows us to guarantee food safety. The information given to us by the FAO representative are really important to be taken into account, and it's an ally when fighting against climate change because it has the lowest carbon footprint impact. And on the other hand, because we are picking up all this marine waste on the bottom of the sea, and we are not only picking it up, but we bring it, we classify it. And the best example I know of circular economy in the world, and this example, for example, of America is really clear as well. And the nutritional property, I believe, more or less, we are all aware of those. But it's always worth remembering those. Aside from being an essential protein, and it has lots of vitamins and as well that allow for having a magnificent benefits, and we should qualify best possible ones. Some benefits that allow for us to improve brain functioning, and those that wanted to prevent diseases like Alzheimer, dementia, etc. If you really you're tired of, or rather, if you eat lots of fish, you're going to delay this in order to prevent skin diseases, immune system, joints, and also the visual function. Eating lots of fish and seafood helps having a better view, better vision, and also better heart function. How many heart attacks have been avoided just because of eating lots of fish? Many of you may be concerned about the cholesterol. Cholesterol is bad. I must be careful. Eat fish and seafood, which are going to give you good cholesterol naturally, and of course, blood. But as was said before, and which I will repeat, something I believe it's spectacular, 100% scientifically proven, that eating seafood and fish produces natural happiness. And this is not something Javier Garat is saying. It's said by Dr. Guillermo Aldama Lopez, cardiologist of the La Coruña Hospital and member of the Cardiology Spanish Society, which in a lecture, because he was saying it produces happiness. But I was like, please explain me why. And he said, eating fish and seafood induces changes in our neurons that improve their connections and produces a neurotransmitter called serotonin. And then I have never had depression, fortunately, but I have been told that people who have depression, what they give them serotonin, so they bounce back up. And then we have this naturally as well. And then there's another argument as well. And then these are some of the projects we face in Sebesca and related to picking up marine seafood, recycling, and circular economy. And like at the style of Redes de América, but in Spain. And then some of these as part, and just some of them. But first, these catastrophic messages that even we even have them, and then that we continuously receive this part, etc. most stocks are overexploited. I mean, we are going to be depleting the seas, for example, reality. And then 64.6%. And out of this fish population, according to this data from Sofia, are in a good state, have a good situation. It is true that there is a remaining percentage of it's overexploited, and we'll have to continue addressing this part. But for me, what I like the most out of this last report is this part, because 82.5% out of this fish as well, and it's about the population, so that in this biological sustainability. And this is really relevant, 82.5% of all landings. And this seem to be ignored by the determined groups or people who don't seem to know, to want to know, as the FAO representative was explaining when she said that people in a noxious fashion, they added both of these percentages because before it was called the fully exploited. And now, fortunately, we have been using exploited the maximum sustainability level, which it is better. And then manipulated information and say that more than 90% of the populations were overexploited. That's not the case. This is the first myth, which does not match the reality. And this is some data from these biomass populations in the Northeast Atlantic, where we operate in the European Union. And if we look at this in the last few years, these populations, this is not just a coincidence, but rather because of these management measures applied and the sacrifices of the fishing sector, biomass has actually doubled in just a few years. And 99% of these landings of populations managed exclusively by the European Union in the Northeast Atlantic were fished in a sustainable fashion. This is usually not said by the media. And we have reduced the fishing pressure by more than 50%. But in this case, this biomass has been increased in the population. And the other myth as well, which I believe to be fundamental, and bottom trolling is a destructive practice and should be forbidden or prohibited. Ever since I'm aware, I started working in this sector 25 years ago. I have been hearing these international, national campaigns against this fishing type, which don't want to convey that we are fishing above corals and vulnerable systems. That's what they say, and that's not the reality. Maybe 25, 30 years ago, it was the case. We did not have this management part as well. And then, but now, really, and if someone does it, they do this because they are making some changes. And also, we should be asking against that. But now, all the areas with vulnerable marine ecosystems, at least those that we are aware of, are prohibited. Thousands of square kilometers have been closed up following these resolutions from the United Nations in order to protect these vulnerable ecosystems. We are talking about a type that, just like any other, if properly managed, can be completely managed. And it's going to rely on the use we make of such art for it to be addressed or not. But it's also used repeatedly in some very specific areas of the world in the same bottom areas formed of mud and sand, and then as well are protected. So, and the other part of the lecture that we have is a FAO, and we got some data which are a bit old, but which also reflect the importance of troll fishing. They were telling us in the last part they had, the last study they had in 2018, and regarding 24% of these landings come from troll fishing, and depending on the area, it's above this 24%. Now you're mentioning 19 million tons per year in this 2011-2013 periods. In our case, in Spain, we captured close to 800 parcels, so between 250 and 300,000 come from this part. More than 300, more than an important percentage comes from troll fishing. This is a fundamental type from the point of view of socioeconomic indicators, but also because of their contribution to, and this is also said by FAO, and this is the main socioeconomic engine of many parts in the world. If not for troll fishing, many of these artisanal fleets and could not work in some ports. Some ice factories would not be viable, for example, and all the socioeconomic fabric around this vessel would not be viable because it would not be profitable. And so it's really important for all of these types, including the troll fishing, to coexist and generate this socioeconomic activity. And something very important as well, and that some species cannot be captured. For example, we have Ambajalera, Cigala, Pontiquitas, so many, and so many, for example, like shrimps, that while they can be captured with other fishing types, would be in really small amounts. And for example, crabs and salmon, squid, and so many different species. And this image, which is what the FAO presented in the meeting at Rome. And I wanted to bring this here. And it's about how they were protected, in this case on the high seas, but in the economic exclusive areas, there is something similar. So how were all of these areas protected in 2006? And where we had a vulnerable economic ecosystems, and 2022 to the left, we can see that practically very few were protected, and ever since that resolution of the United Nations was passed, it's rare to find somewhere where you can fish. And then this part as well. So this green area, this yellow part as well, are some other areas. You cannot fish using trolling, but if you wanted to, you could conduct an environmental impact assessment and prove that you don't have an impact, and then you have the prohibited areas. But it can be checked as well. Not all of you cannot fish unless you have a previous environmental impact assessment, and this is something that we can all be really proud of how we can be contributing. So thousands of square kilometers can be protected, so we don't have any issues. And then this morning, and then there were some initiatives that, from the innovation point of view, have been developed, but this is also happening in many different places in the world, and many places we are using these flying doors, if you will, doors that are not actually touching the bottom of the sea, thereby their impact is much lower, and they're also achieving a considerable reduction of energy expenditures, and with all its positive impacts as well for the workers and the environment because of the less CO2 being emitted. And these are things that are happening and that are not told, and it's good that we do tell them. And we are really interested in this, but in the European Union, this was a classical myth. Red tuna is in danger of going extinct. Some retail chains even prohibited it from being sold because they said it was at the risk of extinction. In 2006 and between 26 and 2010, the population was overexploited in the Mediterranean. But a recovery plan was put forward, and that's what the fishing organizations are for implementing adequate parts if it's overexploited to reverse course, and if it's okay to keep this. But nowadays we have this biomass that went from 2,100 tons since it went from there to 2020. In history, never had there been as much biomass as now. And this year, actually, the TAC quota has to be reviewed, and of course, has to be is going to be implemented because some say that there is a red tuna pandemic, and there's so much they are eating sardines and the other species fishermen that don't have this quota running to them, and with all of these problems. And the reality is that it doesn't have to do with what is being said. Another myth: only an artisanal fishing fleet should be kept. We see some campaigns from some ecologist groups which are trying to generate an official war between the artisanal and this industrial fleet, and are trying to say that industrial fleets are the best in the world and that the others are the devil's spawn. And the reality is that this fleet, regardless of the size, whether artisanal or none, and if it's properly managed and sustainably conducted, well, they are both necessary and complement each other. Artisanal fleets have to be there in the world, but also the industrial one. And both are needed to guarantee food sovereignty. And this is what we are facing. For example, this war in Ukraine, the post-COVID situation, and is impressive geopolitical instability. We have to guarantee food sovereignty. For example, what happened in the pandemic with our dependence on China and now on Russian gas, and we have to guarantee this food sovereignty. So in cases like this, we don't have to rely on the Chinese, which at the end of the day, it seems we are only going to have to eat the fishing coming from the Chinese. Sorry, fish. And then this is an important topic. If we only left artisanal fishing, I don't know in other countries, but in Spain, it captures 15% of all of these fishing, of these captures in Spain. So it would become a protein for the rich, exclusively for the rich, because it would be too scarce to feed the world. So both complement each other and needed. You don't have, we don't need any war between artisanal and industrial fleets the other way around. We have to work together so we can do everything properly. And I will skip this fish consumption, but in the presentation, you can see the attacks we receive and the reality Mercury and is changed. All of this is there. We cannot deny that. We cannot hide that either. And we have to take away, in this case, these sanitary recommendations. In the case of Europe, the European Food Safety Agency, and I think in all of your countries, you can find agencies like this. In the case of Mercury, for example, you can say, well, vulnerable populations. In the case of Spain, pregnant women and those who are expecting, and children between 0 to 10 years of age, please avoid consuming some species. But everybody else can be at ease having a varied data from different species, and you will have much way more benefits than risks. And the final message, the importance of a unity in the fishing sector and communication. I believe the most practical example is what we see in Alpesca. Alpesca came from nothing. Each organization that is part of Alpesca as well was doing waging their war independently. And some people they decided that together we can better protect our interests. And of course, that's the case. Nowadays, Alpesca is being recognized in the FAO, international bodies, and it's just started. And then it's incorporated too, and the fishing associations were part of this more than 15% in the world, and which advocate for our interests in the international arena. Well, that's what we have to continue doing, work together to protect our interests, because if we don't, nobody will do it for us. Nobody is going to go out there and say and share how well we are doing everything and the initiatives we are developing to be better, because the fishing world is not perfect. We still have so much to improve upon. But if we do that together, of course, we are going to have a better work. And communication, if we don't disseminate, if we don't communicate, at the end of the day, this is going to be a message we saw at the beginning, and these messages are those that are actually embedded in society, in societies anywhere in the world, because these messages are falling on us like rain. And we have to share our reality, the good things we are doing, which fortunately there are many. And in the last 20 years, we have made an radical change in the fishing sector as well. And this 25 years ago mindset, we're like, okay, Olympic fishing, let's fish whatever we can, and we don't give a damn about anything. Now it's the exception. Most people are aware of what they have to fish, why they have to follow regulations and all of that. But we have to communicate it. This case, for example, that is being communicated in this Redes de America, we are going to do this as well. We're also working on that, and let's hope at some point we can achieve that. But of course, we have to be together, join forces, collaborate with any NGOs that want to seek solutions to these issues. And some of the NGOs are radical and they don't care. They don't want to sit down because they just care about the campaign. And also, they just want to prohibit all different fishing types. They want to prohibit something, but some don't want to sit down as well and look for solutions. And those are the ones I like to work with, and with the scientists. scientists are key today in this fishing management as well. We have to give them media, not the means, not just the sector, governments, so they can develop what they do, and of course, so they can find this, have this adequate tool and the best possible information to make the decisions, because it's going to be a win-win situation for all of us. Communication and communication. And that's why, while these are photos from the pandemic, as you can see, how everybody's wearing their face mask and all of that to work. But I'll finish my lecture wishing you the best. Enjoy eating fish and seafood, because you are going to be happier. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Javier. Now we are going to continue. Once again, we have two rooms, parallel rooms. This main room, we are going to have a conversation about the impact investment in sustainable fisheries, which is going to be moderated by Renu, with two participants, Enrique Alonso, and they're going to be presented. And the next room will have the contribution of the woman development of fishery and of the sustainable fishery and agriculture, where Maria Espinosa will be the moderator. So I invite you, those who want to stay here, or if you want to move over to the next room. We have Renu. Miguel Jorge is connected virtually. I don't know if he's already online. Hello, Miguel.
Technical difficulty. See? Okay, Miguel.
Yes.
Yay, okay. All right. Hi everyone. So today our session is about how to have big impact and having big impact through small scale fisheries. So I want to just start with throwing out a question. What would happen if we no longer had small scale fisheries? What would that look like? 40% of global catch would not exist. Wild catch, I should say. 90% of employment from the wild catch sector would be gone. Of that, 116 million employed directly in the catch. 40% are women. 7% of global population is directly or partially involved in fisheries. 13% of that is in least developed countries. So just knowing how the small scale fisheries fits into the system, I want to start with Javier. Javier, can you please tell us a little bit about your organization and your work with indigenous communities?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Javier Nareto, trabajo en ONG Costa Humboldt. Nosotros trabajamos con...
We are working with local communities, especially indigenous communities, under certain administrations here in Chile, which are the coastal areas of the original people. This is a figure, a relatively new figure, and the role that they have had, or the figure that they are based on, is the territorial use of right of fisheries. And these are the different scales. And this impact of the administration and what they do to the indigenous people, not only in the way that they handle the fisheries, but also in administrating the different uses of what occurs in the territory. So the approximation of this figure is very holistic. We include the fishery, tourism, social work, and other aspects. Also the cultural that many times we leave aside. And we address this in a more local, that way of the local impact, anything that we do with these kind of events, especially when we talk about the impact of investment of social capital.
Ways that you can promote improvements.
Thank you very much. Enrique Alonso from the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership. I think it's great to be here finding after COVID so many known faces and people. During the last few years within SFP, we have been struggling to provide solutions to small-scale fisheries. The sustainable seafood movement was very successful in developing solutions through market-based tools like certifications, like fishery improvement projects that were thought of for industrial fisheries mainly, and that have worked. They are working. There is increasing improvements in fisheries. There is increasing volumes of fisheries. But the reality is that with time, we have come to realize that we were not so successful in developing solutions for small-scale fisheries. In an analysis that we did a couple of months ago, based on the FIP research database that we maintain we keep with the University of Washington, we realized that a very small percentage of FIPs in artisanal fisheries include fisher folk organizations as participants. So they are mainly NGO-led FIPs, and none of them was led by a fisher organization, by an artisanal fisher folk organization, which says a lot about the tool and the limitations that the tool presents for small-scale fishery. On the contrary, there are a lot of FIPs led by the industry. So there are several gaps that we find to apply the solution, the tool set to small-scale fisheries. First of all is the cost. The cost of improvements is really high. So most of the FIPs in small-scale fisheries, in artisanal fisheries, they have to engage consultancies, they have to engage external NGOs with technical capacity, and that is really expensive. There is an associated problem, which is participation. If you are able to engage the small-scale fishers, you can make improvements with not so much investment, but the reality is that the evidence is showing that FIPs do not have a good critical mass of small-scale fishers as participants. The other is the lack of leadership and organizational capacity within small-scale fisheries. It is the whole contrary as with the industry. Here today we are seeing industrial fishing companies well organized with their associations, their representatives, and so on. But that is really difficult to find in small-scale fisheries. The other is the incentive. Small-scale fishers do not find an incentive to engage into fishery improvement projects. So the end result of it is we need to develop new tools. The other gap is the bar itself. I think we are setting really high bars for small-scale fisheries, for certification that get everybody frustrated because they don't reach certification. So the end result is that we have now to focus on developing solutions that are tailored for small-scale fisheries.
Thank you, Enrique. Miguel Angel, can you tell us about yourself, your time with World Bank and other big organizations, and in your time in the multilateral sector, how have you seen the development banks promote small-scale fisheries?
Okay, thanks, Renu. I'm sorry I can't be with all of you in person, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate at least virtually. And I'm sorry I can't enjoy the rest of the sessions with you. I'm sure that it's a fantastic meeting. So I've spent about 5 years, and I continue to work with the World Bank now separately as a consultant, but I continue to work with them around the world, and I have worked with them around the world. And I think that the way the World Bank works, because it lends money to governments, it takes a very sort of top-down approach and a very general, it's not very surgical, the interventions of the World Bank. So mainly they focus on building governance, strengthening the public sector so that they can conduct the science, the regulations, build the regulations and the policy frameworks for good fisheries management. But it's very challenging because, as you probably know, the World Bank works almost exclusively with developing countries with limited capacity and limited resources. And so it doesn't address all the opportunities for engaging, particularly small-scale fishermen. It's limited in what it can do. It has a lot of financial resources, but it can't do the kinds of things that I think are very innovative, that are, for example, that I think Javier mentioned, that are happening in Chile with spatial rights, empowerment of indigenous communities, empowerment of local fishing organizations, and that I think are fundamental to improving the status of small-scale or artisanal fisheries around the world. I think that's much more important than market strategies, specifics related to fishery improvement projects. Oftentimes, there isn't enough market leverage to drive change in these small-scale fisheries, and we really need to focus on some of the other levers for change that have to do with the incentive structure, not from the market, but linked to the kinds of innovations that we're seeing in Chile, which have to do with the rights and the control over the resource, and building in those long-term interests on the part of the fishing associations for the future of the resource.
Great, thank you. As part of this discussion, there's 2 parts. I'd like to see, the panelists be able to ask questions to each other based on what you've heard from others. and also for the audience to just jump in and ask questions. We want this to be a conversation. We want this to be a learning opportunity for everyone. But trust me, I have a number of questions for these guys too. So I can pause and give space to ask questions, or I can jump into mine. Okay, so my first question, can you, each one of you, talk about the inequities in the supply chain and how to support access for small scale fishers?
From the work of SFP, at the end of the day, fishery improvement projects and certifications serve as a system to access markets, and that has been always the intent, right? To get the market to recognize improvements through an structured approach, through an improvement ladder, so that there would be alignment within the supply chain. By looking at the numbers that I mentioned, that the analysis we did a couple of months ago, and seeing that the little representation, the few representation that small scale fisheries have in FIPS, and coming up with the conclusion that the tool is not set, it is not tailored to improve small scale fisheries. The small scale fisheries, at the end of the day, the side effect of that is that you are denying access to certain markets, to a specific
I would start by, I'm sorry, maybe we should go up the approximation. When we talk about inequality, automatically it's a term of volumes. The volumes that the small communities have, or the coastal communities, cannot give them the access to the volumes so that they can have the equality of incomes. Here we're talking about incomes. So constantly they are in a disadvantage because they require external help or external development. We talk about training, connectivity with the work together, which would allow them to reach the volume so that they can go to the market, so they can have very value with their product. So let's go back to something that is not very in line. How can we reach the volume so they can have better income, so they can have better access to have better investment, so they can have a better infrastructure, so that they can reach to the more elaborated production and not sell out on the beaches? Sometimes we go out on the beaches automatically, an intermediate will take it, the intermediate will take it, he will process it, he'll take it to the secondary plants, and then an export plant. So the chain, the supply chain, it has many different levels, and all of these levels are making the process more expensive and adding value to the product. But to transfer the value of the final product to the beginning of the chain is a very complex thing to do. And also because of the volumes. In local communities, where we want to do the impact, the final impact with these investments that the foundation is giving is a quality of life. So we need to look for these kind of tools, and then we always have this conversation where the chain itself is part of the problem, and we need to resolve this. Partly what you were mentioning, as Enrique was saying, to improve the basis. How with the small scale fisheries, we need to construct on the base, and so how they can have access directly to the bigger markets.
Miguel, do you want to add, or do you have a response to Javier as well?
Oh yeah.
Hold on one second. You went back on mute.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I completely agree with Javier. I think we find again and again in different parts of the world where small scale fishers are highly disempowered. And if you look at the value chain, what Javier is describing, it repeats itself around the world with small scale fisheries, where actors along the value chain retain most of the value of the products, and there's always pressure on the fishermen to keep as little value, to produce the product and have as little benefit from that as possible. And market demand for certain attributes of the fishery can help if there are social attributes desired. And I think FIPS are trying to go in that direction. But I think it's also important to work to empower the fishing sector. And one of the things that we worked on in the World Bank were these sort of shared value models where an aggregator in the value chain would establish a very transparent relationship with a large number of providers, product providers, fishermen, small scale fishermen. We've applied this in agriculture with small scale agricultural producers, and we've started to apply it with fishermen, where the aggregator supports the fishermen in providing some training, some technical resources, some equipment, maybe even some financing. But in return, they receive a fair price for the product and a guaranteed market for the product. And so these are not the traditional relationships that are somewhat opaque, but they're very transparent and they're up to certain social and environmental standards. So building these more transparent relationships in the value chain, combined with empowerment of the fishing community so that they have leverage in the negotiations, I think need to be part of the solution.
Thank you. So before I move to next, I wonder if there's any questions from the audience. Rodrigo.
No, es una pregunta muy rápida a tus comentarios. Gracias por...
This is a comment this is a question, very quick question to your comments. My understanding is the FIP model works, or the final objective is to improve the sustainability standards of the fisheries through an incentive. That what you're trying to do is that the fishermen feel like that this incentive will come to them. And I completely agree with what you are saying. In the term through the value chain, we see that it never arrives at them. My point is, what is the incentive when I don't have this economic incentive? How can I push the fishermen? Because my experience has also taught me that when you sit down with the fishermen, what the fishermen want is an economic incentive. And when this incentive does not exist, there is an incentivization to not do anything. And finally, the fishermen, for instance, they give information, fishing logs. They don't receive this incentive because they feel like that they are doing something that unfortunately the sustainability goes by. The benefits of the long term of the sustainability, they cannot perceive it immediately. They have a population of long-term benefits will not exist. So my concrete question is this: what do you think could be an incentive so that the fishermen can work and the improvement can move towards the sustainability if it does not involve an economic incentive? Good question. Probably have three answers.
What we are seeing is that, well, obviously the tool, we have a tool set, right? We have several tools that are being applied at different levels by different actors. What is evident is that the current toolset is not providing that, is not serving as an incentive, is not providing that incentive. Now, there is not an easy answer, and I don't think anyone has the answer. You know, there are pilots here and there. None of them are serving to scale them up. So there is a real, the real challenge is to create a solution that can mobilize those incentives. And as of now, I don't see any. There is an experience that we are, well, we are trying in several fisheries, and it has been an interesting experience because we have been working for a couple of years now in trying to get the fishers to lead FIPS. That means you have to get them organized. That means you have to get them, you know, trained. It's double the work that we do with the industrial sector, or 3 times or 4 times in terms of time, in terms of investment. And it is an investment that can be totally lost. We don't know if that will work or not. And I don't find many funders, you know, willing to fund the development of these experiments for a long time. So they want results now, right? So it's I think we have to keep doing these experiments, but I don't see any quick solution now, honestly.
Rodrigo, yo a lo mejor discrepo en parte en el sentido
I
de que
probably don't agree that much. In the local part, I can see some incentive when we talk about the social and ownership, when we're talking about the rights of the land or the waters. The idea is I'm taking a decision of what I'm going to do with my local stock, which would allow me to have some local extension. I'm not talking about great extensions, but the impact on the smaller fishery on the local stock causes extension. We have seen it many, many times. The banks disappear, so we see that they are displaced, even though there might not be an economical incentive, but the fact that they can make their own decisions on their own territory. And I can decide if I'm going to put a pressure on one fishery or release the pressure off of another fishery because of the area. It's my decision, and it doesn't come from the government or the market. I do see it as an incentive, and this is what I see with indigenous communities under the figure that we have been working with, invites them to work with us in the workers' union, with those who gather weeds, etc., on the sea or algae, to maintain these fisheries at a long term and give them the possibility to decide what's going to happen with their local fisheries. The problem is the impact. We're talking about some areas that are completely out of stock. And when we begin to add the things, we see a local incentive, which allows us to this, but a national scale and global, that's totally discussable. We can talk about it. And also when we talk about the small scale fisheries, they want to have a bigger scale. There's no FIB that goes to a micro scale. And when they go to a micro scale, they are lost investments. They are very high risks where the possibilities of having success, 2 or 3 might come out with very good results and the rest are going to go to loss.
Yeah, I just want to add.
Solamente quiero agregar.
Can you hear me?
Miguel.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes. See?
hold on. They have to switch over every time.
¿Y ahora?
Sí.
Okay. So, all right. So, I mean, it's a combination of things, and I agree. This is not going to happen overnight. But I think we have to look everywhere for financial resources, and we have to look everywhere for levers to incentivize local fishermen. For example, and this comes back to our work in the World Bank, in many parts of the world, artisanal fisheries are de facto social protection programs. You subsidize the fuel, you give them some opportunities to go fish and feed their families, and you hope for the best. And what should be happening is a transition away from helping poor people feed themselves by subsidizing their fuel to helping them become small entrepreneurs and helping them be sustainable entrepreneurs and working collectively in their communities to strengthen their communities. And that requires shifting some of the public resources away from those perverse subsidies to perhaps programs that can empower them, support them, help them reduce their risks related to climate change or related to other uncertainties that can help them in a way that doesn't promote excess fishing effort, but it does empower them. So that's another potential lever to help drive change. That how does the social protection scheme in a country support the artisanal fisheries sector in a more sustainable way? So I think that's another area where I think we could perhaps make some changes and think about doing some work to try to strengthen small scale fishers. Thank you.
Going back to your question, I was thinking about a case where we ended up developing a FIP led by fishers, a fishers association, because there was a FIP led by an NGO, and they got pissed off with the NGO, and they said, we want to develop our own FIP. And they did that. So going back to Javier's argument, I think there are a lot of incentives, but they are too context specific. So, and that is the case of the ENPOS, that is the case of this FIP. I mean, I wouldn't expect all the fishers in the world, to react to the fact that they are being named in a FIP led by an NGO and develop their own FIP, right? It's not an incentive that is scalable. So I think as of now, we rely upon context specific or historical issues that lead to people who are really well organized and they are proud of their fishing techniques or and so on and so on.
Any questions?
Sí, no, más que pregunta es un pequeño comentario sobre el tema de la escala, ¿no? De los FIPS.
More than just a question, this is a comment about the small scale fisheries. We want to say, what is the incentive that exists in the market? Like the certification is not a universal solution. And nobody pretends that they all be certified. And we don't all pretend that all the fisheries be involved in the FIPS. And there are
Start having
other
other
tools,
for
like for
example,
instance,
GSI
together with the
FAO are
FAR
developing
having the
this seafood
seafood
map
map
tool,
tool
which also seeks to
is
act
like an
as an
incentive.
incentive.
The
USCN
USN
is also
is
developing
also
a
developing a
website
website
to
to have an
highlight the
initiative to
initiatives
improve the
for
fisheries.
fishery improvement. And
But
there are
there
some
are some
cases of
cases
very
of
small
small
scale
scale fisheries.
fisheries, which I feel it's good for them and they're
For
getting
instance,
there.
we are
So we are working, for
working
example,
in
in the
Pesca
Pesca with the
from the Gulf
fisheries in
of
the
California. It's
Gulf
a
of
very small scale
California, and
fishery.
it's a really small scale
They
fishery. They
finance
finance everything.
everything.
They're
They're
interested in
interested and
this.
it's
This is
convenient
good
for
for
them
them,
and
and
they're
they are
doing
doing
it.
it. So I think
I
we
don't
cannot
think we can generalize
not FIVs
what
for
we did
this
for
for
this.
that.
There's
There is
something for
something for
everyone.
everyone. Where
What's
it's
not
not
convenient, where
good
there's
or
no
not
interest,
interesting, or the
the
FIB
FIP does not
is not going
generate
to
this
generate this
leverage
leverage
for
for
the
change.
change.
Well, in those
Then we
cases,
need
we
to
have
find
to seek
another
other
tool.
tools, and that's it.
when you look at the numbers speak.
And there I've always have this question, if you will. And here we have, I mean, this is not per se not recognized as FIB, but when we have a fisheries, especially in the territorial part, which don't have an defined management, we don't have these quotas, which have these waiting periods, and then it's entered and there is a stock assessment and measures are presented. And does that have a long-term impact? Because we went from nothing, from open access basically, to something that is controlled and it's not recognized as FIB, but it does have an impact on a local scale, small scale. So we are systematically maybe forgetting about this package of tools that are not recognized as FIB, at least openly, but at the end of the day are fishing improvement at the local scale. I'm not sure what's your opinion in that regard. Maybe Miguel Angel wanted to mention something about this.
Sí.
Okay, so I think we need to look everywhere for incentives. And again, I come back to it would be fantastic to find ways to create critical mass of collective rights in small scale fisheries like they're doing in Chile. That's a fantastic set of new incentives for those fishermen to start thinking about their long-term success and how that relates to the long-term health of the resource. So aligning that the natural capital, as we say at the World Bank, with the financial interests of the fishermen is an important first step where the governance structure allows that to happen. But there's also access to finance for fishermen that can be linked to environmental standards. So you could think about low interest loans linked to or other sources of financing linked to environmental meeting certain minimum standards for fisheries management, et cetera. We need to find those other levers to support fishermen because the market isn't there for many of these small scale fisheries. And we just, the FIP doesn't take you anywhere in many cases.
To respond to Javier's question,
Okay.
A FIP is a tool. It's a tool with certain requirements that is recognized by the market. All these small initiatives, they can be framed as a fishery improvement project, but to do that, you have to follow certain steps and follow some criteria.
So I think for so long we've used FIPS and certifications as although it's a tool, we've kept using them as a solution to a means. So before I jump, any other questions, Gonzalo? Sorry.
Sí, bueno, esto se me fue, Claudio.
Louder, please. And then it's in a feature. We work with a FIB, which is from bottom ups, and we have these problems you're also mentioning. And for me, I think about this premise, maybe this first premise that the FIB is has to have an economic return for fishermen. And in this MCC model, we found this answer by an FIB as a fishing improvement, and also fishermen from Ancud. They are not certified. They are in FIB on this fishing progress platform because of the requirements they need in market issues, for example. And this premise, which is therefore preserving this FIB, may be useful, yeah, for some fisheries in particular. That model, this model of change they have, which is not useful for all fisheries, and that may be the problem. So why are they doing that? Why are they making these improvements like that? Because I believe there is a management instance, and Javier said something about this, and they feel empowered. And in this case, where achieving this economic benefit is not this a means to an end, because we are talking about their work. I mean, the end is making it so their work is decent and sustainable over time. If they have an economic return, it's more than welcome. Of course, it's a plus. But this model, which is implemented very easily in our society, may not be useful for everyone. I believe co-management instances are those that make it so people feel empowered, as you're saying, this word which Javier mentioned, and that make it so you want your work and the source of your work, not the origin, for this to be better. And that, I believe, may be a paradigm shift. There is no solution for everyone. There is no one size fits all, if you will, for fisheries, I think, in any case. But there are some fishermen who do have this desire, not only to earn money, but to make their fisheries more sustainable.
Very, very cheap. And the fact that in the data, there is not any single FIP led by a fisher folk organization, and most of them are led by, consultancies, NGO. That means that they are following, all the steps to become a FIP, and they are not getting and that means more money, that means more bureaucracy, and so on and so on.
Solo yo estoy de acuerdo
And
con...
I agree with that. And just that I believe those co-management instances take a leap, a quantitative leap, when they become involved in management. That has been useful because we are seeking, for example, in this FIB, I mean, we don't have this idea of removing this part, but we actually tended to say like everything is against us. But we have this idea to achieve this and effectively also to follow that model. What we do realize is when we have these instances, these co-management instances, there is a qualitative leap, and fishermen really, when they have these instances, feel empowered. And that's what I wanted to refer, that these tools are useful. This is one of the best improvement actions we can take. Yes, I mean, this is about the incentive you mentioned. We do have an idea this FIB is looking for a market incentive, and what would be the alternative? That's what Rodrigo is asking. There is a social and empowerment incentive that makes me generate everything an FIB is looking for, and has a stronger organization, a more structured organization. On the other hand, it improves my fishing practices in many cases. And as a consequence, we could have improvements in potential markets, right? But as you indicate, we need to work on production. So for these FIVs, instead of attacking stock assessments or the health of these populations, maybe it could address this access, and that's where I was getting into the fact that this is a venture capital for infrastructure. If I put infrastructure, for example, I keep these fishermen to have to go through from so many hoops and quickly transfer improvements. But this is extremely risky because experience shows, for example, many plants are just left there, many investments are not executed as intended.
All right, we'll jump from FIPS. I think FIPS are very interesting. We could talk about them all the time. So it's kind of funny. I'm hearing you say how FIPS are very expensive, which now makes me think including women is very expensive. So as I mentioned, 40% of women are directly employed in the fisheries sector. Obviously, as a panel, we did a very terrible job because we only have 25% women included in this conversation. So my question to all of you is how can we do better? Like, what are we doing that we are not being able to include women, or what are some solutions or recommendations to be more inclusive? I'll start with Miguel Angel.
I mean, I come back to some of the tools that we used in our work at the World Bank. We have very strong criteria and guidelines for engaging, doing poverty alleviation and development work with a very strong focus on gender. For example, a very simple thing that we insisted on in many of our fisheries projects was you can't have a meeting about resource management or the future of the fishery with local stakeholders unless you've budgeted for childcare and made sure that women are invited to that meeting. So, you know, that makes projects more expensive, that makes efforts more burdensome, but, you know, that was how we tried to, one small example of how we try to make sure that women are involved in the decision-making process because they are impacted directly by the consequences of different fisheries projects. So they need to have a voice. I was in Peru a few years ago, and fishermen in this hake fishery in Peru just did not want to allow women in the cooperative. And so they set up their own cooperative, and they, you know, set up in parallel, and they got support from the World Bank project to strengthen the women's cooperative because the men in that culture weren't going to support them. But I think it's very important to ensure that perspective and given the roles of women in society and in the sector, they have to be respected and they have to be accounted for.
Sí, tomando y reconociendo.
Yes, and picking up on and recognizing this topic of this cultural aspect, which is the most relevant part of how society is picking up on women's inclusion in fisheries, at least here in the case we work on, which more than half of women participate in terms of management and have an active presence in fisheries. If it's not on these vessels, they work on land, for example, fixing nets or aquaculture, working on this in this infrastructure. So that's a very important work they do, which is not that they are not or that they are not included. I believe this is about the visualization most of the time. And also allowing them to access to make their voice heard and also voice their point of view in these instances, which in my defense, I also mentioned, I mean, you invited us. So in this question of the 25% women in the panel goes back to you. The panel was created by a woman and we are more men here. So this also talks about the culture we live in. I believe the work of women, I insist on coming back to this, there are some cultures that don't even allow them to access, or at least our experience is that they participate actively in fisheries, aquaculture, and maybe this be just this about allowing them to make their voice heard and become visible, how to become empowered, and they speak for themselves and don't have to go through a male fisherman.
For certifications, they depart from a specific view on how you have to manage a fishery. And that specific perspective comes from the way that developed countries are managing high resource intensively, how they are managing the fisheries. I think we have to recognize that there should be different buckets and that we cannot use the same standards to serve as the goal for small-scale fisheries in the global south. And developing standards in the small-scale fisheries for the Global South, they should consider social and equity issues. There is no way to escape that. They should not focus only exclusively in environmental factors, and they should not build upon the idea that a well-managed fishery is a resource-intensive fishery management model with data-rich science, with a lot of enforcement, which is impossible in most of the countries in the Global South, and with perfect management. I think we have to recognize that there should be different bars to measure both.
Great, thank you. We have 3 minutes left, and I don't know if there's any other questions from the audience. All right. So I'm going to end with this question about, we're in a room full of different actors from the supply chain, from industry to NGOs to civil society, funders, private sector. What recommendations would you share, would you give to improve fisheries management or to be more inclusive of small-scale fishers?
Compleja pregunta.
It's a complex question. And I always go back to the fundamentals is where we work at the most. So I believe the value of working with communities is our people. So when we are able to validate the work they do, and not just adding value regarding outside their local communities, but also adding value to the work they do within their local community and empowering them, empowering local communities and their people. And as individuals, I believe it should be the target for all of us. And in this way, we can not do this from a bottom to up, but at the bottom up in what we are doing or what's coming for our way.
Need of understanding the differences, the particularities of each sector. From the NGO sector, I think we have to create solutions. And we created solutions. We are constantly creating solutions, but there is a need to upscale those solutions. This is my perspective of what the NGO sector should do. And it is time to reflect back and create new tools.
Y Miguel Angel.
Yeah, big question. Look, I come back to the importance of a holistic approach that incorporates, all the aspirations of the fishing community. I'm not a big fan of looking at fishermen as workers or labor, or that produce a product for the seafood industry, for processors to buy and process and add value to. I really think it's important to, if we value small-scale fishing as part of a society, then I think we need to empower them to address all their needs, and make sure that they are in a position to make decisions about the resource and their future and how they want to pursue prosperity. They're not just a labor source for fish.
Thank you. So I think we're at time, and I don't know if we have like a couple more seconds for questions if anybody has any. Otherwise, we'll end it here, and I really want to say thank you to our panelists. It was a really good conversation, and obviously we'll be around if you have further conversations with us. Thank you, Miguel Angel, for joining us virtually. Thank you, everyone.